out of the ordinary insights. Brought to you by Investec Specialist Bank.
Welcome to this week's edition of Captains of Industry. My name is Gugulethu Mfuphi. Well, today we have the pleasure of speaking to someone who is very well known within South Africa's mining fraternity, Niel Pretorius, Chief Executive of DRD Gold.
Hi there.
Thanks so much for joining us. I must tell you, I had an interesting conversation with our head of news a little earlier this morning where he said your name is spelled wrong because it's Niel.
Yes.
And I told him, no, it's not. Your full name is Daniel.
That is
so
correct,
it's
yes.
spelled correctly.
Yes. Yeah.
And not many people know that. So clearly interesting roots that you come from.
Yeah, no, in our family, I think there are 7 of us that have the same name. So I was either going to be Dani or Klein Dan or Dainkie, so my mom decided Niel. The only one that's called Niel in the family.
And maybe let's explore that aspect of your life, growing up in Fontaine. As you mentioned, strong family ties. How was it for you growing up?
Well, the first few years, I grew up in Philippolis, a small town just south of Bloemfontein. And it's an interesting existence. The entire school, I think, had 60 pupils. So you knew everybody, everybody knew everything about you. It's certainly the sort of environment where every prayer refers to the weather. And it's either please let there be some more rain, or every 7 years or so, please let the rain stop. So I suppose that never leaves you. The fact that there are always something that you don't really or fully control that might happen, that's going to happen, you just don't know when and how severe it's going to be. But then Bloemfontein and boarding school, like most of my friends at the time, which was an interesting experience as well.
Boys catching up to travel as usual, or just the different city life experience?
It was more of a, well, if you call Bloemfontein a city, I think you might hear a few chuckles. But yes, it's certainly much bigger than Philippolis. All of a sudden you've got things coming at you from every direction. And you've got to fit in. You're no longer just 60 in the whole school, you're 60 in the class, and you've got to make it work. I enjoyed that. That was a good experience too.
Well, that was also the beginning of your journey to Gauteng, where I understand you got your law degree. Not many people are aware of that. What motivated that decision?
No, I was an attorney. I couldn't do maths, and I was very bad at numbers. And I wasn't going to become a school teacher, so I think...
Or a police officer?
Yes. Well, I didn't play rugby well enough to become a police officer. Most good rugby players became police officers in those days. It was sort of semi-professional way of playing sports. But no, it was law. And that was also, I think for me, it was a good experience. I must admit, most of my clients subsequently were either called the accused or the respondent or the defendant. So it was always a challenge to keep trouble away. And maybe that wasn't a bad way of preparing me for the mining industry, of keeping bad things away. Yeah.
Exactly, and maybe if you can walk us through your entry into the mining fraternity.
Yes.
You actually joined as head of legal, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct,
and also dealing with labor disputes, which are practically synonymous with mines at the moment in South Africa.
Absolutely, yes. No, it was very much as the legal advisor that I joined DRD Gold. I started studying again at the time. As I said, I spent most of my time in the courts, and I decided to do some further studying, and during that period the opportunity arose to join DRD. I'd been doing some work for them, and especially for the operations in those days, on and off, so it was a good opportunity for me to develop my legal skills and to study, and then to continue with a career as a lawyer, as an advocate was the intention at the time. But then I got involved in the general management side of things. It was 11 years ago that I joined, and I must say I enjoyed it. I enjoy the environment, I enjoy the people, and the type of law that I got to deal with there was the type of law that I found very stimulating, very interesting.
How was it different?
Well, firstly, your client's no longer called the accused,
That's a
or seldom called the accused. Yes, there was a slightly more sophisticated side of law. Obviously, there's a little bit more commercial work involved. You get to be on the front foot from time to time. We bought several companies or several operations at the time in those days. We had to close down several of them, so I think the orderly closure and exit from an operation was something that I was taught. Dealing with labour issues, very complex labour issues, and also understanding the social side of being involved in the mining industry. Those are the things that you get to learn as the attorney, because that's very heavily regulated, and it's increasingly regulated, including the environmental aspects of being involved in mining. So that was a very good period of let's say, preparing me for what then became my second career at the mine.
I want us to keep your lawyer hat on for a moment.
Yes.
And when you take a look at the labour strife that you see unfolding at many of South Africans' mines, how dire is the situation compared to when you first got into the industry?
Look, I think a very unfortunate precedent had taken effect in South Africa, and that is that you have standing, notwithstanding the fact that you're outside of the arena, that you don't follow the rules. So most of the time that I was involved in labour disputes, the other party, although they had taken a firm position more often than not, they followed the rules. We had allowed unions, and one specific union, to get away with that, to get away with breaking the rules, operating outside of the a very well set and I think established set of rules that worked well up until they broke it, and then providing them with both standing, an opportunity to present their case, and also with an outcome. So that's very unfortunate. I think it's going to take a while before we get back to good order and away from playing outside of the arena. Because with that, you introduce just so much unpredictability. If you conclude an agreement with somebody who's involved in an illegal strike, then it means that he has no regard for the law. So he's also not going to have any regard for the enforceability of the contract. And that's a very, very dangerous dynamic to have in your labour force.
So is this maybe a discipline issue when it comes to the labour force?
Yeah, I think it's a discipline issue from both sides. I think it was very unfortunate that the corporates had buckled and had allowed for an outcome amidst an unlawful strike. I think it was maybe an enforcer or a regulator not enforcing the rules properly and not saying these are the rules and we stick to the rules, but actually putting pressure onto the corporates to maybe buckle. You don't want to say who's to blame, but maybe there's a component of truth in each. And I mean, Labour will go as far as you allow them, and unfortunately irresponsible leadership had taken Labour down what is turning out to be a destructive path for Labour. We're seeing strikes now 4 or 5 weeks. You could pay people twice what they demand and they won't catch up the loss in income because of these strikes. And you just set in motion a whole very unfortunate cycle of indebtedness and garnishee orders and additional, I don't want to call it, well, hardship basically. You're introducing hardship as part of a cycle. So we need to get out of that. I think the latest platinum strike, the northern strike, was it? That lasted 10 weeks.
Yes,
I think
cost the company at least for 500 million rand.
It did, but that was the first step in the right direction. And I think we're very fortunate that that Lynn had taken a position there and that he had stuck to, this is how it's going to be. But the reason that he had to do that, or the fact that he had to do that in the first instance, was maybe because of bad advice or poor discipline a few months ago from the industry. So he was the one to bite the bullet for the rest of us, and hopefully more will follow suit. We've got to get law and order back into in the engagement between Labour and the corporates and government. Without rules, it will just further deteriorate.
But how far are we from that when you look at the overall landscape? Is it really all doom and gloom, or are you optimistic about the future?
No, I think we've got the right CEOs at the moment. And if you look at the majors, the gold players and also the platinum players, they're the ones that really bear the brunt of these initiatives. Every single one of them, I think, have made it quite clear that it's either you play by the rules or you don't play at all. And hopefully the unions will realize, not the unions, I mean, there's one labour union that follow the rules, there's another that doesn't. And hopefully the one who doesn't will realize that they're just bringing hardship onto their members, and they will eventually toe the line.
I'm happy to hear this from a chief executive's perspective, and it makes sense given the fact that you used to sit at the negotiating table with unions. But maybe walk us through your top job at the moment. I'm not too sure if many people envy you, but is it tough being the chief executive of a mining company in South Africa at these times?
Look, I think it's you ask somebody if there's a reason why he should feel sorry for himself, and I'm sure that he'll think of several, but no, it's not. I think you know what the decisions are that need to be taken. Sometimes executing them might not be that easy because it's not always politically the safest thing to do. I think the market has short-term memory. The market's like my golf swing; it suffers from acute short-term memory loss and or muscle memory loss. So every 3 months is a new cycle in your life, and you've got to work to those 3-month cycles. You can't run a company like that. You've got to run a company with the long term in mind. The capital decisions that you take are long term, etc., etc. And I think most people who are CEOs of listed companies, they know those things. They know what the right decisions are. It's sometimes executing those decisions, putting them into effect, and also getting the right support from all interested parties to put them into effect. That becomes a little bit challenging. But it's a fantastic experience, because I think the socioeconomic dynamic in South Africa at this point in time, the fact that you get to play a role in that, and that you can play a positive role in that, that's a unique opportunity that we should make use of. Important thing is just not to start feeling sorry for yourself.
That's a key lesson I think everyone
Absolutely.
needs to follow through on. But clearly, as a CEO, you mentioned that you didn't have much of a love for numbers, but that's automatically something that falls under your role of responsibilities now.
Yes.
Clearly, you go to bed with a lot of things on your mind in order to please all stakeholders.
Yes, you're never going to please all stakeholders, but what you want to dish up is a balanced dish. You want to have something that is balanced, that strikes a balance between the interests of the shareholders. And of course, you've got to lean towards the shareholders, because they provide the capital. And they only give you capital and ask you to look after the capital if they think that there's going to be a decent return on that capital, one that outperforms a fixed deposit, by way of an example. So you've got to be very mindful of the long-term prospects of your shareholders. We now function in an environment where you've got to be sensitive to the environment, obviously, because I think the environment needs to be looked after, or else your business won't be sustainable. I think every component of sustainable development is something that you've got to bring into your thinking, your planning, your strategic execution. And we've seen that most of the really successful companies out there are the ones that bring sustainable development as a key and a core strategic driver, driving thinking, driving allocation of capital, driving executive execution. If you don't bring it into your day-to-day management philosophy, then your company won't survive. The environment's just become way too complicated. There are too many different interested parties and stakeholders to ignore any of that. And I think the challenge of being an executive that has some longevity, that survives longer than 3 years, is managing that and balancing that, so that you could deliver into the reasonable expectations of each of those stakeholders.
Welcome back to Captains of Industry, where today we are continuing our discussion with the captain of the mining industry, and maybe law. Maybe we can find a few other hats to fit onto Niel Pretorius's head. He is the chief executive of DRD Gold. Niel, before the ad break, you had touched on the importance to please all your stakeholders, and that, quite frankly, it is quite a difficult job. How does that relate to the team that you have around you to provide some kind of support system, and especially in the industry that you're in?
Well, what has become essential, I realize, is that you've got to have a good mix. You've got to have your veterans, so to speak, the ones with the experience, who can walk into a plant, into a stope area, into any part of your operation, and intuitively, based on 20 or 30 years of experience, pick out what needs to be done and how do you fine-tune this. However, I think most of us, we take into the latter part of our career the stuff that we learn in the early part of our career. And many of the veterans, so to speak, although I think they're receptive to the concept of sustainable development, the putting it into effect is not something that comes easily. So you've got to mix the veterans with a healthy dose of extremely well qualified younger people. I'm finding that in the environmental side of the business and on the human resources side of the business, we're appointing young people that have master's degrees. That's how complex I think these portfolios have become. And that is the mix that you've got to have. And of course, the standard that you set and the expectation that you create, or the demand that you put out there, is that it's either the best or nothing at all. So you've got to always strive towards being the best in that particular field. That's why you're there, and that's why what you try to achieve.
How important is that mix, as you mentioned, the veterans with young, qualified individuals, especially in a country where 25% of our youth is unemployed? We recently saw the youth wage subsidy, youth wage bill being signed into law. Is that something that you're so taking up at your firm?
Well, what we try to do, and we started with this a few years ago, about 4 years ago, with the establishment of a college, or the rebirth, so to speak, of a college that used to exist on that footprint and that we then recapitalized. It is absolutely essential that we bring younger people in, that we skill them up, that we prepare them for the real world. We've got this concept of entrepreneurship that I think is a little bit naive. Entrepreneurship means delivering into the real requirements of society, of a community, not just selling stuff to foreign tourists. So we're trying to deliver into that, producing managers, producing artisans, producing proper skills. But I think in addition to that, and that's where the mix of your veterans and your younger people, where that becomes important, is increasingly I think that you'll find that corporates will run programs with interns, where you bring young qualified, young professionals into the business where they shadow maybe the CFO or the CEO or the Chief Operating Officer for a period of time, just to see what that environment looks like. Because one of the things that we're finding in business with accelerated promotion through the ranks in order to achieve the transformation that our constitution envisages is that the exposure to a wider perspective within each portfolio, that exposure is limited and sometimes not long enough. So the transfer of skills is going to happen far more quickly. If you spoke to a DG, for example, 20 years ago, he would have worked at every single level within his department. Nowadays people are moved around and they don't quite know the mechanics or the workings of their portfolio. And I think a process of internship or a policy of internship, maybe self-sponsored from time to time, is the sort of thing that more corporates would have to do. Or else we're not going to achieve sustainable quality outputs within management and within corporations.
Are we seeing that being filtered down into the levels where miners are also being upskilled as well as learning the other mechanics that comprise of a mining company? Because I think the born-free generation won't really be mining in the same fashion that we did 100 years ago.
No, I don't think you'll see that. What we are seeing is more and more companies are running with programs. We call our program Best Life. And basically what Best Life involves is financial skills or managing your budget. There was a very interesting article in the Belt yesterday on where our labourers actually get paid compared to the global index or the global standard. It's become fashionable to say that labourers are underpaid in South Africa, but in fact they're up in the higher quartile compared to the rest of the world, including the developed world. So I think there's a dire shortage of just understanding how to manage your financial affairs, and those are the skills that you've got to push in there. You've got to create opportunities for skills that have developed over a long period of time to be pushed up into the organization. So I think your structures are becoming far more flat. Communication regimes are changing. Maybe not that much in the underground environment, but certainly in the more operator-minded environment, I think you're finding more and more of that happening. Corporates are mindful of the fact that unless they step in, unless they put programs in place where people can actually go and learn something, maybe it's a wonderful initiative, but ABLET is an elastoplast. You've got to have real programs where real skills, how to find your way through life, how to manage your financial affairs, how to plan for retirement, how to plan for your children's education. Those skills aren't taught. And I think increasingly corporates are putting programs in place where those skills are being taught and taken back into the communities where the workers come from.
It's so profound that you mentioned that, because it also follows through to corporate social responsibility, and it's a great initiative that you have there. But looking back onto your career and when you started out as this young attorney, did you have any of those skills, or would you go back and give Niel back then some advice?
I had an old principal where after 2 days of toil I would walk into his office and say, "Sir, would you please have a look at this?" And he would read sort of halfway through the first paragraph and said, "What did you try to say here?" And halfway through my first sentence he would say, "Well, that was wrong." So and that was the best principle imaginable, because it was in at the deep end and you learn very, very quickly because you don't want to embarrass yourself. And he was a kind gentleman, but also a very good educator. So I didn't have those, but then again, I think your environment, the fact that you've come through a schooling system that not everybody has access to, maybe prepared you better for that kind of environment. We have lots of first generation everything in South Africa at this stage. And I think the rules of society, the rules of commerce, the things that we sometimes take for granted, maybe having gone to a better school, are not always the things that are taken for granted for somebody who had to walk 15 kilometers to school every morning after having tended to the cows or whatever. It's a completely different environment, and I think there you need programs that would introduce people to the subtleties and also the intricacies of what that new commercial environment is, because they're going to be part of management very, very quickly with the transformation goals that I think are fairly fairly tight in order to get there.
You've also got 2 young sons, as far as I understand. Is there any key words of knowledge that you pass on to them to prepare them for life going forward?
Look, I'm from a background where you've got to work harder than everybody else, make sure that you prepare properly for everything, sort of a very clearly defined moral code, which my mother, I think, lovingly taught, but enforced very, very strictly. I think those are the things that you obviously try to transfer to your children. The one thing that I do say to them, which has changed since I was a youngster, I grew up, I matriculated in 1984, and everything was put at the disposal. You could make a late comeback when I was a young Afrikaner, because all the universities were there basically for us. All the opportunities were there for us. That no longer exists. There are no longer really opportunities for a late comeback. You really start working towards getting a decent job when you're in standard 6 or grade 8, as they nowadays call it. And if you miss the boat, you miss the boat. And the chances of a late comeback, I think, are remote. You've really got to be dedicated and apply your mind and work. That's what it's about, yeah. You've got to work really hard. Yes,
hard
to make
work, quite clearly.
Hard work, yeah.
And for yourself as a chief executive, I'm sure you've got bigger ambitions and a greater role that you'd like to play in society. Maybe work even harder than what you are now.
Yes. No, look, I don't think I work as hard as some of my colleagues, but yes, I mean, obviously, you know, you want to remain relevant. You want to make sure that what you do personally and also within your company is relevant not just for your shareholders and for your colleagues, but also for South Africa. I love living in this country. I would love for my children to live in this country and have the same, enjoy the privileges that I enjoy, the privilege of living in this beautiful country with its wonderful diversity. In order to do that, I think the focus on being socially relevant has maybe become a little bit more profound in our organization than what it would have been 20 years ago. And DRD, as far as I'm concerned, is more than enough. Every opportunity that I need to do what I believe is right and that could ultimately make some sort of a contribution, I could do right there. And DRD's potential, I think, is vast. You know, we use technologies there. We've essentially become a technology company, and we use technologies there that you can roll out into manganese finds, into coal finds. We build slurry lines, rather, that are longer than 60 kilometers. We understand slurry dynamics and pipe dynamics.
That's the mining jargon.
Exactly, better than anybody else in the country, if not on the continent. So there's vast intellectual capital that we could roll out. Important thing, of course, for us is in the meantime is to make enough money to ultimately do roll it out, and that is something that we obviously got to focus on all the time.
You also have a passion for golf, so what's your handicap?
I play off a 6 handicap, but it's not a particularly convincing 6. So I don't talk much about my golf because it has the way of peaking and then shortly afterwards a very spectacular collapse. But yes, I enjoy playing golf.
How important is that for you, that work-life balance, especially in such a stressful environment?
Look, I enjoy just the honesty of golf, and I know that it's supposed to be an elitist sport and so forth, but it's the one thing in life where you could practice as hard as you want, but you're not necessarily going to get better. It requires just a completely different approach, and for me it's a good analogy to the sort of bumps that sometimes come your way in life. The mere fact that you're trying harder than everybody else doesn't mean that you're going to be more successful. There are a whole lot of other subtleties that you've got to take into consideration, and sometimes you're just very fortunate. And I think I've been very fortunate in my life.
What do you wish you knew when you were 25 that you know now?
Well, that's a very good question. I suppose I wish I knew that the gold price was going to come down from $1,800 to $1,200 last year. No, I think my life was paced and I was exposed to the right sort of input at the right time. I can't really think of anything in particular. Maybe a little bit of a glimpse into the future as to see where South Africa is now. There might be programs that I would have started with earlier if I'd known just how profound the political morality shift was going to be in that sort of thing. But on the whole, I don't think I would have done anything differently if I had better insights when I was 25 years old than what I have now.
So quite clearly living a life with no regrets.
I'm very fortunate, yes. No, I'm a very fortunate. Fortunately, I married the right girl, and I ended up working for the right company, living in the right country, and the decisions that I didn't take myself, that were taken on my behalf, were fortunately the right decisions. So I'm very fortunate, and hopefully I can give some of that back.
That's a phenomenal story, Niel. But I want us to go back to your first pay packet,
yes,
which I understand was at 300 Rand.
Where did you see that?
Where did you earn that? What were you doing, and what did you spend it on?
Oh, I was an article clerk. In those days, we weren't candidate attorneys. I think in those days, the job description reflected your status and also the type of work that you did. Now, I was a first-year article clerk in Kimberley. And look, it was my 300 Rand. I think 120 of that paid for my flat, which was water and lights included, and was a fairly decent. My menu was very modest. I ate mostly Viennas and rolls and eggs. So somehow I never ran out of money. It was enough. I brought some savings out of my national service as well, so that also helped a little bit.
Gosh, if only one could go back to those days, hey? Rent of 120 rand.
Yeah, well, I was taught to fear debt, you know, so maybe that played a role.
Indeed. Niel, it's been such a pleasure speaking to you, definitely gaining insights as to how one should live life better, as well as the potential changes that are taking place in the mining industry.
Thank you, it was a privilege. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Well, there you have it from Niel Pretorius, who's the Chief Executive of DRD Gold. But that's where we leave it for this week. Join us again next time when we speak to another captain of the industry.